Democratic State Representative Rafael Anchia of Dallas, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Thanks for having me, Jack. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you and thank you. You are hosting a Know Your Rights forum for your constituents in your district. Obviously, this is in response to the crackdown by the Trump administration we're seeing on illegal immigration. What is your message and what is your goal for this event?
Well, there's a lot of fear in community. Obviously, these are the essential workers that clean up after us, pick our crops, take care of our children, and they're really concerned about the really heavy rhetoric surrounding the administration's new executive orders. I want to underscore one thing, Jack. There's a lot of common ground here. If the Trump administration wants to focus like the Biden administration did on deporting violent criminals, murderers, gang members, drug dealers, all for it, right? The Biden administration made those priorities in their 1.5 million deportations during the last 4 years, and we think the Trump administration should continue focusing on people who want to do us harm, right? There's no disagreement there. The people in my community, however, are concerned about deportations related to moms, grandmothers, nannies, dishwashers, people who are contributing mightily to our community. And they do have constitutional rights. So we want to let them know about those rights in case that they get swept up in some of the activity from the administration.
And walk me through some of those rights, if you don't mind, because, the man who President Trump calls his border czar, Tom Homan, has said, to your point, that the Trump administration is focused really on the violent criminals, but he has also said, if you're in the country illegally, you've got a problem. So walk me through some of the things that you are going to be telling folks tonight about potential situations they may find themselves in.
Well, the first thing we want to tell them is that they can collaborate with their local law enforcement. Chief Igo and I were at a meeting the other day, and we both acknowledged the challenges for local law enforcement who are trying to do community policing, work with all residents of community to keep us safe, get people to report crimes. We want to differentiate first between federal efforts and our local efforts, because that's important to keeping us all safe in Dallas. Number two, the constitutional rights that they have relate to their ability to have an attorney, to have counsel, to not engage in self-incrimination. Those basic things that we're all guaranteed under the Constitution, regardless of immigration status, we're going to be discussing with experts in the field. So we're going to have immigration lawyers there. And then finally, we want people to know that, while the administration at this point says that they're focusing, like the Biden administration, on prioritizing criminals, even people who are here legally are starting to feel the changes in these executive orders. You can ask any Venezuelan who came here legally under temporary protective status that is now being revoked, what their anxiousness is like. So we want to give people an update on what these executive orders mean, let them know their rights, and then let them know that they should still be able to cooperate with local police to solve crimes and help keep us all safe.
How widespread is the fear?
The fear is substantial. Folks who have never committed a crime, who are here contributing to community mightily in the construction sector, in childcare, and helping, take care of us as a community, as essential workers, are really scared, because while we absolutely need immigrants in our community and should be welcoming them in a safe and legal way, now the administration is really turned up the heat on rhetoric, especially with respect to rhetoric, and immigrants who are even here legally fear for their current situation, just like the Venezuelans I was talking about earlier. So it's important to level set, to separate rhetoric from actual risk in community, and just let people know that people like me appreciate our immigrant population. Not only as the son of immigrants myself, but someone who acknowledges their massive contribution to our community.
I wanted to ask your thoughts about Governor Abbott and the executive orders that he has had as far as requiring state agencies to help the Trump administration at the border, sending more troops from the Texas National Guard down there. and also requiring more border barriers being put in place. And then also the governor meeting with the president and offering 4,000 jail cells in state prisons across the state to hold migrants, and then also offering about 2,400 U.S. troops bed space at Texas military facilities.
Yeah, look, when the governor sticks to policy and not political theater, I find that we're usually aligned. Like the other day, he said he wanted to seek reimbursement from the federal government for costs related to Operation Lone Star and other border activities. I'm in complete agreement with that. Although he limited it to 11 million, he only wanted to talk about our expenditures related to what occurred during the Biden administration, but didn't want to talk about Trump 1 or before. Because the reality is, that even under a second Trump administration, we're looking in our base budget at another $6.5 billion. My reimbursement request from the federal government would say, hey, reimburse us for the full amount north of 20 billion that we use. And let's not try to parse this to play political games like the governor is doing. Likewise, the Biden administration deported 1.5 million people who were criminals and dangerous to our community during the last cycle. That was more than Trump did during his first administration. And so there's really not a difference in policy, maybe a difference in tone. The further reality is that we're at our lowest levels of migration in about 6 years. Currently at our southern border, I recently toured the border and saw the big holes in our border fence, the big gaps in our fence that cost $29 million a mile. And so what I like to do is find solutions to what we are confronting at our southern border, not political theater. So I agree with the governor in his desire to be helpful. I just disagree in his demonizing of prior administrations and his sudden embrace of Trump, because the tactics on the ground are relatively the same.
Well,
DPS
I
is
have to
working with.
ask,
Go
I
ahead.
have to ask you though, just to clarify, make sure I understand what you're saying. I mean, there was a quite a different policy between the Biden and Trump administrations because we saw record amounts of people cross into the U.S. illegally. I mean, there were record amounts for 3 years.
That is actually not accurate. They came through those people who came through CBP 1, right? Which the Biden
Not
administration
everybody,
set up. I'm sorry.
not everybody.
No, true, not everybody. When the Biden administration was able to implement its policy related to people remaining in their country of origin and only coming through when there was a CBP 1 appointment, then people came in that way. The reality is, yes, our border was overwhelmed early on in the administration, but it was rectified through policy. In fact, the president tried to solve that policy or cement that policy through federal legislation, right? But of course, had negotiated it with Republicans. Of course, President Trump wanted to deep six that effort so that he could implement his own policies and take credit, like he is today, for these record low crossings.
Well, I mean, just like every other reporter, we track the numbers that the federal government provided. They did it on their website so everybody could see it. And I counted about 8 million people who were apprehended at the border after their
And
entry, not
4
to do
million of
with
those
this.
under President Biden were turned back.
Well, I mean, I'm just telling you
And that
that
and that
those are the
that too is
numbers.
reported, Jack.
Yeah. Well, those were the numbers that the federal government under the Biden administration reported. But let me ask
But
you one other
just
question
coming
on
to the
this.
border doesn't mean you get across.
Well, but many of
So
them
8
did.
million people did not come in during the Biden
No,
administration.
they
Let's
were
just be clear about that.
well, they were apprehended at the border. But I don't
Well, it
want to,
sounds like it was working.
huh?
It sounds like the system was working then if 8 million people were apprehended at the border and sent back.
Well, there's a lot of debate over that, but we know what the numbers were. But let me ask you this question because I think I really want to hone in on what you said as far as the $11 billion. and you want even more.
And,
How
and,
would
and
you
just to
like
be
that?
clear, it's over 20 billion.
Right, but the 11 billion is the ask from the governor, but I understand your point. But let me ask you, how do you think that money, if Texas does get it back, how would you like to see that spent?
Oh, I think it needs to go to public education, candidly. We have been closing schools, laying off teachers. Our school kids, our teachers, our administrators are suffering in our public schools, doing deficit spending. The governor held public school spending or public school investment hostage during the last cycle. We need to make sure we make our public schools whole, like we promised in 2019 when we did our historic school finance reform. And that's where the money should go, period, full stop. If you want to use some of it related to ongoing operations, to deport criminals, by all means. But I really do think that there's a big hole in the education budget that we need to fill, and we're not looking at filling it through the current budget.
The proposals from the House and the Senate roughly increase public school funding by about $5 billion. At least that's in the initial proposals and the budgets. How much higher do you think that should be?
Well, two points about that. The 5 billion is still short of the 7 billion that were promised under the 2019 school finance reform. So, we're still about $2 billion short of even those levels that were not adjusted for inflation 6 years later, right? So, unless you're looking at apples to apples, we're going to be pretty significantly short. Something else is really important to note, that this shortchanging of public education came after COVID, when we were dealing with record numbers of retirements from teachers. We were really trying to rebuild the public school system. So a reform in 2019 that did not contemplate COVID really shortchanged the public school system by an even greater amount. My sense is that we need to increase the student basic allotment by between $1,000 and $1,500, and that I believe would be a starting point.
And let's talk about teacher pay raises. It seems like everybody is in agreement that teachers deserve a pay raise. What I've seen in the Senate is $4,000 for every teacher and an additional 6,000 on top of that for rural teachers. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, our teachers are woefully underpaid. It's hard in both rural areas and in urban areas, where we need the best teachers to deal with sort of lack of pre-K access, harder more expensive to teach kids. I'm all for measures that bump people up. One of the things that we do not do often enough is discuss in the legislature how to make the teaching profession competitive with other professions. And even with these increases that the senator is talking about, if our best and brightest, unfortunately, unless they have a heart of gold and a heart for public service, which many of them do, will not go into teaching because it's just not economically competitive. If we're going to continue to be the 8th largest economy in the world, we need to make sure that we're building up our human capital. You do that through great teachers. We need to be paying our teachers more.
And let's talk about school choice. It passed in the state Senate as everybody expected it would. And now it goes to the House. The House is going to file its own bill. And I'm wondering, the governor is pretty convinced that he's got the votes this time around. I think he picked up another Republican in the last couple of days. And so I'm wondering, how are you going to fight it this time?
Well, it's possible that a public subsidy of private schools passes. It's certainly not conservative. The Senate version of the bill doesn't ring fence it to kids who are in failing schools. Doesn't means test the bill. Has $1 billion a year price tag associated with it. Those things are problematic. If there is going to be a public subsidy of private schools with your tax dollars, we need to make sure that there are performance measures attached to it, that there's a lot of rigor attached to it, and candidly, that the private schools are going to be on an apples to apples basis doing better than the public schools, not just doing the same, right? If we're going to be giving up accountability on these public dollars, we need to have better outcomes. And so those things are not present in the Senate bill, and those are the things that we're going to be looking to add on the House side.
And then I did want to ask you about property tax relief. In his State of the State speech, the governor is requesting $10 billion in additional property tax relief. And also, he wants a requirement for approval by two-thirds of the voters before any local entity can pass a property tax increase. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you'll recall that we did $18 billion worth of property tax relief during the last session. I supported that. I voted for that. I mean, people are struggling with their property tax. 10 billion is going to feel like a tax increase for people, candidly, because in order to keep the same tax, the one-time tax decrease in place, it cost us $18 billion. It would cost even more this cycle. So people regrettably will not be feeling they will not be feeling their tax cut, unfortunately.
Even
The
with an
reality is that the
additional 10
reason their
billion?
taxes go up is because we have not fully funded public schools, right? So the largest portion of their tax bill is their M&O tax for ISDs.
Right.
And because we have not been fully funding public schools at the state level, it's driven those taxing decisions down to the locals. The locals have either had to increase taxes, which they tried to hold the line on, or they've had to engage in deficit spending like Dallas ISD and dipped into their rainy day fund. So they're really at a breaking point. If we fully fund public education, that will be a tax cut for people ultimately.
And so even with the 10 billion on top of the 18 billion from 2 years ago, you're saying that's still not enough.
Nobody thanked me for the $18 billion tax cut we did last time because ultimately they didn't feel it in their tax bill. 10 billion, they're going to feel even less. The only solution to really lower your property tax bill in the biggest portion, which is your local ISD tax, is for us to do more investment from the state level. That will lower your taxes at the local level.
And what about the local request that the governor has that, local entities would need a two-thirds majority by the voters? That's pretty
It's
steep.
Yeah, it's another gimmick, candidly. Like I was a local elected official as a board member on Dallas ISD. I was closer to the people than any politician in Austin. And we rely on our local elected officials to make decisions because they're closest to the people and they understand what people want, need, and aspire to. Because the governor and the legislature has failed to fully fund public education, locals have had to act, and that now we're saying no, you cannot do it without a supermajority because we have failed to fully fund you. And again, so it's a real gimmick. I trust local elected officials to make decisions who are closest to the people, not politicians in Austin.
Democratic State Representative Rafael Anchia of Dallas, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack.